The biggest opportunity is what we spend our time thinking about, which is inventory management. On average, when we take over our customers' inventory to help them with their fulfillment and logistics, about 20 to 30% of the information that they give us is wrong or the products are lost. And then another 10 to 20% of inventory is just stuck. Immediately, almost 50% of our customers' inventory is not creating value for their business. So for us, the most important thing is how do we make that 50% of inventory create value for our customers?
When talk to some of these sellers that sort of shot up on marketplaces, they become very focused on sort of ticks on the marketplace. Here's how you do X to sort of get a bit of sales here and there, and just forgot around the core, actually just making a product that works well, staying with the consumer and the original founding story. It's super interesting.
You have a lot of these execs that come and say, oh, you run this 3PL business, this fulfillment business. I'm like, when was the last time you were in the warehouse? And then his management team laughs. That's not a good thing, right? And the point is you need to be close to your customer, not just the consumer, but also the merchant and everyone in between the distribution network.
Hi folks, welcome back to On Call with Insignia, where we go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia. In today's episode, let's dial into a conversation on supply chains and distribution networks moderated by Insignia Ventures partners VP Shefali Dodani.
We now explore another frontier for growth in Southeast Asia, supply chains and distribution within the context of the global digital economy. It is my pleasure to be moderating this panel, and I would like to invite the founders joining me into this conversation. Patrick, co-founder of GoTo Group, Jay Chai, co-founder and CEO of Rainforest, and Phil, co-founder and CEO of Shipper. I'm sharing the panel today with leaders in the supply chain industry in Southeast Asia. Thank you so much for taking your time today. I'd love to kickstart this panel by doing a quick introduction from each one of you. And to make it a little more interesting, maybe share a little bit about yourself, your journey to building the companies you're building today. Go ahead, Patrick.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Patrick. I was one of the co-founders of GoTo when we merged Gojek and Tokopedia and subsequently listed it last year. That's been an interesting adventure, as with many technology stocks. For those of you who don't know, Gojek and Tokopedia, we combined the largest consumer technology use cases in Indonesia, as well as Singapore and Vietnam. So we're the largest on-demand mobility, food delivery, grocery, delivery, e-commerce, and financial services. And our main base is in Indonesia. So we're not exactly a distribution company, but we do a lot of distribution. So in Indonesia, we cover 99% of the 17,000 islands. The only 1% we don't cover either doesn't have electricity or doesn't have telco service. So you can't access the app, or we just can't get there. And we do that by working with 13 logistics partners, some of which are here today, across 3PL delivery, across fulfillment. But we also look at distribution in terms of not just goods, but also digital services and money. So this is a very important part of our largely marketplace business. You asked me one thing about my journey. So a lot of people don't know this, but I was one of the earliest investors in Gojek. So that happened around 2013 when I was at Formation 8. I had the option at the time to either join Gojek or Tokopedia, but my wise wife told me, maybe you join something where you don't know everyone, where the culture is a little bit different. And so I made that decision 7 years ago. And here I am today. We went full circle. So invest in Gojek, invest my life in Tokopedia, and then marry the two. And we're very lucky to be here. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. Over to Phil.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phil. I am the CEO and co-founder of Shipper. When my partner and I decided to build Shipper, our goal was to help businesses of all size to simplify their logistics and supply chain from their manufacturers to customers. So today, we serve thousands of e-commerce businesses, offline retailers, help them to move their goods, store their inventory, and manage their inventory, essentially from manufacturers, sometimes overseas, to their customers. And where we're operational, we are primarily operational in Indonesia and Thailand with customers from all over the world. One interesting thing in my journey in building Shipper. So in the first 3 years, we're about a 5-year-old company going to 6. In my first 3 years building Shipper, I didn't get a lot of time to exercise, so I started to get really big. And I like to keep active. So what I used to do to keep myself active was go to the warehouse for free gym sessions, which basically meant move boxes in the warehouse and out of the warehouse. That kept my fitness level at peak. I'd say that's probably one of the hardest work that you can imagine. Harder than today. I'm getting old and I can barely run up and down the basketball court, but it was a lot harder than running up and down the basketball court. I really appreciate all the folks that we work with on the ground who do that day in and day out.
That's really interesting. I actually never knew that. How about you, JJ?
So I'm JJ, CEO and co-founder of Rainforest. Rainforest is a house of brands. We operate brands in the mother and baby space. We acquire and operate these brands. We've got 16 brands now, predominantly selling to the US and predominantly marketplace driven on Amazon. So we typically acquire from small operators for these brands and then optimize and grow them in terms of product expansion, geo expansion, and channel expansion. Anecdote about my journey. When we first started Rainforest, we weren't so focused on mother and baby. Actually, we were big on the thesis around Amazon is a growing platform. There are a lot of small players on Amazon that are not run optimally, and we could get any type of brand and just run it. After the sort of first few acquisitions in there, we started realizing that sort of running a sort of car parts brand and a sort of cereal brand has very little synergies between them and really complex to really drive growth and understanding of the consumer actually. And we decided to focus on a specific segment. And we started looking at different, who are the sort of different buyers we could focus on. Interesting one, sort of health and beauty as a category. Pet owners was a big one. And then, as three co-founders and myself, we were all three parents, 6 kids amongst all of us, myself, 3 kids. So we all took a look at ourselves and said, okay, we're not the mom typical profile, but understand enough of the sort of the parenting journey and the sort of the number of products that come into your life once you have a kid. And we decided to focus on the sort of maternity and kids space as the target category and the audience.
Got it. And for some context, could you maybe share a few brands that you actually have acquired or built? Maybe for context, I'm sure some of you here are parents as well.
Yeah, if you go and unfortunately we don't distribute here in Asia yet, pretty much in the US, but you go on Amazon and you look for a diaper backpack, you just put in the keywords. The top seller up there, Belberoo bags, are one of our brands. One of the interesting parts about this bag brand, I'll just comment a little bit about it, is like in the sort of change of like modern parenting is that a lot of these bags used to be designed for the mom, right? So they'd be smaller, a bit sort of more feminine. Nowadays, a lot more dads are doing the job of carrying this stuff. So it needs to be big enough, look not so feminine. So there's a lot of sort of like interesting changes in consumer behavior around like how parenting is done and sort of in the backstory. Another one sort of like actually our sort of toy storage and sort of toy brand that this morning we actually do products for children for toy storage as well called Lily's Love.
All right, interesting. Thanks for sharing, JJ. So Phil, I have a specific question for you. So we look at Southeast Asia today. I think Tokopedia itself has done a great job of bringing brands to reach customers with scale, right? Now, Phil, you've built one of the largest logistic network in Indonesia, right? So how are you seeing the competitive landscape in Indonesia specifically? We are seeing more foreign brands as well being established, local brands that are digitizing as well, and emerging brands, right? So maybe could you share a little bit of how these brands are evolving and how's the distribution evolved over time?
Yeah, I think there's a few questions there. I'll start off with what are some of the trends that we see in terms of brands coming in and out of Indonesia and who are doing well and why. And then second question is our role in that journey. On the first question, I think historically building domestic brands and growing domestic brands was difficult because manufacturing and local supply chain capabilities were not so strong in Indonesia. But I think over the last few years, there has been a lot of investment and a lot of push from regulation to get local manufacturing and supply chain capabilities up. So you see a lot of customers and businesses beginning to set up assembly lines, beginning to set up local manufacturing capabilities. And one of our most recent customers is going to set up a large phone case manufacturing plant to do all the phone cases domestically rather than import from China. So I think number one is I think we'll continue to see a lot of rise of brands that manufacture and build their supply chain domestically. Second is there is over the last 12 months, there has been a rise in or an influx of brands coming in from overseas with especially the entrance of TikTok. So with the entrance of TikTok, the ROI on selling online on that specific channel, at least when they were still live over the past 12 to 18 months, was quite competitive. While the ROI on selling in other markets or selling on other channels domestically were not growing as well. And as a result, folks who knew how to sell on TikTok, majority coming in from China, quickly all came in at the same time and started leveraging their ability to sell on TikTok and grow with TikTok. So we saw a huge influx of sellers over the last 12 to 18 months who knew how to do that type of business really well, come in and do well really quickly. So, those are the two kind of seller trends that we've seen that has helped our business do well and think about our business differently over the last 12 to 18 months. In terms of how our business helps these brands, essentially the way we think about it is we want to help our customers to lower down the barriers to entry to build a brand and build their business. And the way we think about it is it makes competition for our customers competitor, it makes their life harder. So our goal is to continue to do that. We want to continue to lower down the barriers of entry for these businesses. We help them to drop down their fulfillment costs from something that they had to invest in large capex before to something that they can pay per unit and come in and start on day one. So it's our entrepreneurship package. And we help them to continue to grow and optimize their supply chain. And some of the biggest customers that we work with, the largest shoe brand, the largest F&B brand, the largest paper brand, some of these are some of the largest companies who we help to digitize their supply chain and help them to optimize their logistics. Our goal is to make it as easy as starting within a week so that any entrepreneur can start a brand today. And we want to be there and continue to grow with them as they grow.
Thanks for sharing, Phil. Patrick, over to you. I noticed that if we look nationwide, especially in Indonesia, there's, as you mentioned, 17,000 islands, right? But in reality, if we look at on the seller side, a lot of the sellers are concentrated in Jakarta, which makes logistic costs in general very high if you want to distribute from Jakarta to the likes of Makassar or Medan, right? So in that case, how does Tokopedia actually prioritize some of the city expansion plans? And how do you ensure that distribution becomes and is able to be maintained efficiently?
So when we started 15 years ago, you're right. Buyer and seller geography was largely based in the greater Jakarta area. Every year that goes by, that number gets better distributed. So we started greater Jakarta, and then tier 1 rest of Java, and then tier 1 all of Indonesia, and then now tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So the mix of greater Jakarta contribution has gone from 90+% down to under 50%. And that took 15 years to do. And the question is, why is that? So a large part of it is this distribution issue, because when we first started, there was 2 3PLs. And then at the time, if you wanted to do between islands or between cities, there weren't a lot of options. And even if there were options, it was very expensive. So the thing is, if you take a look at history, the way the government invested and built infrastructure, layered with the rise of 3PLs, and then the digital first 3PLs, we all grew up together such that we were able to create a distribution network to be able to facilitate that. And I think at this stage, and this is something that Phil mentioned, is that the game has changed a lot, right? So the biggest problem before is that people either were trying to do everything or they couldn't do anything. And a lot of them were subscale. But what he's built is completely different, right? It's digital first. He understands the pain points of the brands. You're not trying to build everything. Some of the enablers in the beginning, they would do marketing for you. They would do pick and pack and fulfill, and they try to go everywhere. But you don't need to do that, right? There are certain channels that make sense the most. So for our journey, one of it was infrastructure related. The other was technology related. We built the largest 4PL that connects all the fulfillment companies, all the 3PLs to be able to, at our scale, basically deliver anything. And then when you inject Gojek bikes into that, you can do even more, right? People, food, packages. And then I think that the next iteration of this is you do your own fulfillment, because there are certain SKUs for certain customers in certain regions where they want it fast and they're willing to pay. And the existing players can't provide that SLA, so you have to do it yourself. So I think that's the kind of journey that we went. But for anyone building a business, you need to start where the customers are, where customers can pay. And unfortunately, that's capital city, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and so on and so forth.
Understand. And in terms of systems, right, it's really case by case basis, right? So how do you actually localize your platform and ensure that the user experience is still retained, right? Because I guess as everyone knows here, the dynamics per city varies a lot. Some of them are more tech savvy than the rest, right? So is there something that Tokopedia is doing differently to ensure the user experience remains consistent?
Yeah, so the rural versus the urban experience, you're right, is completely different. So there are two things roughly that have happened. The first is as Indonesia became more developed, then you saw both the government post office, but also 3PLs set up retail and distribution centers in those areas so that you could serve the rural customer. And it was by no means widespread. It was highly linked to GDP growth, but that enabled us a door to go and service those markets, leveraging our partners. The second thing that we in particular did was we built our Mitra Tokopedia business. So imagine you set up like a 7-Eleven equivalent with all of our branding in major villages around Indonesia. And you work with basically the village elder or main mom and pop shop, and they become your distribution hub. So that was a fantastic strategy for us. It's great marketing, but it also allows you to serve that customer with the most basic things that they need. And then third is working with the distribution companies that exist already, in particular, the ones that sell FMCG and cigarettes, right? Because they are widespread across Indonesia. They exist, they are our partners. So we work with them. So I think one was what was already there or what developed as we developed, and then what we built ourselves in order to service those markets that weren't being well served.
That makes sense. Essentially, you're also catering to the offline demand, right? And not losing business from there. JJ, for you, I think Patrick did a great job on sharing a little bit about distribution locally, right? You yourself, you're building a platform for brands on a global scale. So in your case specifically, right, for the brands at Rainforest Partners, how does Rainforest actually adapt to the acquisition strategies? It's very different, right? You look at one country to another, the requirements for acquisition and go-to markets are different. How do you prioritize that internally?
Yeah, it's built on basically in the US at least, the sort of platforms, the infrastructure on 3PLs and so on have been built out over the years. And actually that's what sort of gave birth to our industry, which is like the aggregation of smaller brands. These people like the Shipper of the US, like Tokopedia of the US, Amazon and so on, made it super easy for anyone to create their own brand and launch it. Anyone with just a bit of imagination and capital can do it because the infrastructure is there. The result of this is thousands of brands coming through, and unfortunately not all of them succeed. A lot of them actually don't succeed. Some of them become the next Allbirds and so on. And then there's this mid-tier brands that sort of do quite well, unable to scale to the next level. And that's where we come in to give them an exit and scale up these brands. What we have found in this sort of whole acquisition approach is that a lot of these owners have been able to grow on the back of tailwinds on logistics being made easy and marketplaces making it easy to reach the consumer. You can be very successful on that marketplace. But the moment that stops because of COVID pullback or because of capital markets changes, you don't really have a brand. You really have a good product on the marketplace, right? And a lot of learning now is sort of like really helping these brands become a true brand, meaning that like it's sort of investing in compounding effects where people actually decide and understand that I want to buy a Babaru bag versus it being top ranked on a certain marketplace and so on.
And what would you say are the learnings so far? What differentiates a good brand from a subpar brand, right? Based on your history of acquiring a lot of brands.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that we've been looking at a lot, right? In the past, we've been actually very focused on online and say, look, if it's got a lot of reviews and ranked by consumers, that's a good brand. And now it's changing our tone and going back to super old-fashioned basics. Actually, so I asked people around, do they actually recognize this brand? Have you heard of the brand called Babaru? Is this part of your consideration set? Do retailers actually want it offline and so on? Changing to a pretty old-fashioned way of assessing whether a brand is actually a durable brand from a sort of recall perspective in there. Then the other sort of elements of it are a bit more obvious really around, and do you have IP? Do you have something unique that sort of differentiates for you and that no one can just get a supplier in China to produce the same goods?
You mind if I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know what you think about this, but I think the other thing is, at least on our platform, the brands that became successful online, that tried to copy what everyone else did offline, they fail. They end up like losing what made them good to begin with. And the second one is the founders and management teams of these brands that don't have a story and like a authentic, I'm going to call it marketing strategy, right? They got so successful at the grassroots. And then for some reason, as soon as they got a little bit of scale and success, they stopped doing it. And I think those combination of things with what you described, I think those create enduring brands because they understand their purpose or their why. The ones that like are a shot in the dark, they forget what made them special to begin with.
Yeah, that's super interesting, really around the fact that when you talk to some of these sellers that sort of shot up on marketplaces, they become very focused on sort of ticks on the marketplace. Here's how you do X to sort of get a bit of sales here and there. And we just forgot around the core, actually just making a product that works well, staying the consumer and the original founding story. It's super interesting how they get put through to sort of tactics.
Yeah, interesting findings. I think we resonate with that because we ourselves at Insignia do look at a lot of brands ourselves, but it's very hard to build a long-lasting brand, as you mentioned rightfully, JJ. So moving on to the next question, right? So when it comes to building distribution for brands and businesses, in specific geographies that you focus on, Indonesia in this case, or even the US, right? What is the biggest market opportunity that you're seeing, but not everyone is paying attention to? Maybe Patrick, we can start with you.
I still think that the enablers are largely subscale. I actually think you are the exception. If you look at who your competitors are, SLA as they scale actually declines, despite the fact that there's more volume and more utilization. So I think one is they just don't know how to build and scale basic operations. Number two is, as part of that, is they were great at, let's say, 10,000 orders per day. Once you get past that, they're not leveraging technology, automation, very basic SOP that you'd get at a big company to bring it to the next level, or they're hiring these people that they think are silver bullet people from Amazon or Unilever or wherever, but that don't actually have the ability to scale teams or digitize to get them to that next level. So I think that's one, right? It's just like a matter of scale, teams, SLA. I think the second thing is they just try to do too many things. I think the one exception to this rule is like Baozun in China. If you go visit them, they have a whole building for Nike and they literally do everything, right? From like when the shoe is produced in China or overseas, when it hits the factory floor directly to the customer. But to do that, they built everything in pieces without forgetting like what their core business was. A lot of the enablers out here try to do everything under the sun and all of it is not done well. And I think that we've seen that pressure, which is why we had to go and build our own fulfillment business because they just couldn't fulfill the SLA. So I think that's one area where, if you've done what Phil's done and his team's done, you pick your lane, you do it super well, and then you add to it. That's very effective. But to try to do everything under the sun, that doesn't work.
I think case in point that models in general can be copy pasted, right? From the US or even LATAM to Indonesia. So Phil, over to you, right? For the same question, what is the biggest market opportunity in your perspective that others are not seeing? You can answer it specific to your industry if that helps.
Yeah. I think the biggest opportunity is what we spend our time thinking about, which is inventory management for our customers. And the reason why that's such a big problem is on a good day, of course, inventory management is not as important because everything sells and everything's all good. But on a bad day, that's when poor inventory management can really kill businesses. On average, when we take over our customers' inventory to help them with their fulfillment and logistics, about 20 to 30% of the information that they give us is wrong or the products are lost. When I say the product information is wrong, that means they say it's a blue shirt when in reality there's a pink shirt. So that's already 30% that is not sellable because it's either wrong or lost. And then another 10 to 20% of inventory is just stuck. Stuck means it doesn't move. And it doesn't move means it's just sitting in their warehouse, some already expired, if not expired, already out of date, out of fashion. Immediately, almost 50% of our customers' inventory is not creating value for their business. So for us, the most important thing is how do we make that 50% of inventory create value for our customers? So how do you make sure that the inventory information is correct, transparent? How do you make sure nothing is getting lost along the value chain, which is very complex, especially with larger supply chains? And how do you make sure that 10 to 20% of inventory that's stuck, the customer has transparency over that information so they don't make that same mistake, or that stuff is flushed out so that the customer can continue to have good cash flow. So for us, that problem statement is still very fresh for the market that we serve. And we think that's the biggest way we can help our customers today.
That's interesting that you said that. We've seen that it's not only lost inventory, right? It's more dead inventory. Or yeah, as you said, inventory that is stuck, right? The 10 to 20%. Who's really solving it right now? So over to JJ. I would love to hear your thoughts on what is the biggest market opportunity that you're
So this is unscripted, but actually very, very similar. We are a brand principal, so we feel the problem of having inventory that's not moving and figuring out how to sort of liquidate, move this inventory is a real one. And so you step back, like where the problem is coming from is like in e-commerce and so on. Obviously, the sort of straight line growth that used to happen doesn't happen anymore. There's also a lot of consumer need to actually get stuff quickly, right? Nothing more true in the US where it's Amazon Prime, click, tomorrow is there. So we have to predict, build a lot of products, send it to all the nodes. And then if demand doesn't happen for exit reasons and so on, we're stuck, right? And this happens across in many different industries and categories as well. And the sort of tools to solve this is quite lacking. We are seeing some providers trying to figure out sort of name your own price solutions to sort of make a bid, and then we like airlines kind of thing. But I think there's a lot more innovation that can happen in this space, both on the sort of demand shaping perspective as well as on the supply chain side of things.
I think the business model that we were looking at is, okay, so let's say you've got dead inventory or you've got inventory that doesn't move. So the beauty of a country like Indonesia, and I think this is most emerging markets, is it might not sell for the majority in tier 1, but when they return it or it's dead, it's actually still very valuable in non-tier 1 markets, right? So that was a big piece of infrastructure that we were looking at because it will still sell. And guess what? Like a pink teapot doesn't sell in Jakarta, but it sells really well in tier 3, tier 4 cities. So that's how you can help it move. When we first thought of it, we didn't have the infrastructure, but now that we've got better coverage, it's a lot easier.
Really interesting insights, everyone. Thanks for sharing. What would be your key message passed on to the next wave of entrepreneurs building in the distribution space? I think all of you here have ample of experience under your belt, right? So we'd love to know as well, what are the key success factors that you've seen help you during your journey? JJ, go ahead.
Yeah, mine is back to very simple basics around actually keeping very close to the consumer and understanding what they're looking for and what's changing in there. I think that's ultimately the sort of one of those more long-lasting, can't be wrong kind of answer. But also as founders, so easy to forget, right? So easy to get distracted and then build for investors, what investors like, what trends in the market. But actually going back to the consumer and figuring out actually what do they want and starting from there. It's one of those extremely trite, but easy for founders to forget, myself included.
All right. What do you think, Phil?
I think number one is don't do it yourself. Use a third party. If you guys want to enter Indonesia or Thailand, call us. Let us know. We're here to help. We're here to serve. I think second is where I see some of our customers get hurt is around how they concentrated their supply chain on imported products only, especially in the recent days or recent last couple of months. I've seen a few businesses, go from a lot to very little overnight because of that. And I guess from a brand owner's perspective, you are not thinking too much about how do you de-risk your supply chain, but you're constantly thinking about how to sell more. But I think there's something around de-risking the concentration on your supply chain so that you have different suppliers, different ways to get products in case of rainy day or in case of any regulatory changes.
So Phil and I have a very good friend who runs our GoTo logistics business. And he'll say to you, if you don't look like you sleep in the warehouse, you are not a logistics and distribution professional. And I would say that is entirely true. So JJ and I are clearly not dressed to do that job. But Phil is dressed very well
Ready to move boxes
for that job, and he's ready to move a box. And I'm not kidding, because you have a lot of these execs that come and say, oh, you run this 3PL business, this fulfillment business. I'm like, when was the last time you were in the warehouse? And then his management team laughs. That's not a good thing, right? Richard Liu in JD still goes to the warehouse. He still drives a truck. And the point is, you need to be close to your customer, not just the consumer, but also the merchant and everyone in between the distribution network.
I'm not sure if that's a jab at my fashion.
Compliment.
Good thing.
Founder market fit.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time today, your insights. It was very exciting to have this conversation. Thank you so much, Patrick, Phil, and JJ, for the insightful conversation.
Thank you for joining us on this call. Make sure you get notified on when to dial in by following us wherever you're listening to us. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, toss in a like, and let us know if you'd like to hear more of this topic in the comments. See you all in our next call.